All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thanks for joining us for this session at PeaceCon 2020, responding to the pandemic and building peace, the role of the media. I'm Michelle Betts. I'll be your moderator today. I'm thrilled to be here with our star panelists. Just a quick intro on myself, and then I'll introduce the topic and our panelists. I am a former journalist and journalism educator. The last 15 plus years, I've been working in media development, primarily in post-conflict and conflict settings, places like Rwanda, Burundi, the DRC, South Sudan, and the Ukraine. I'm thrilled to be here with our panelists. We will be talking today about COVID-19, which has highlighted perhaps more than ever the vital role that trusted and accurate information plays in times of crisis. We're going to be looking at the challenges that professional journalists and independent media have faced during this pandemic, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings. We're going to look at positive ways that journalists and the media have been used to help to respond to the crisis, to reduce drivers of conflict, and to help build more equitable, just, and peaceful societies while ensuring that their communities have the information that they need. Each of our panelists today is going to be sharing their thoughts and reflections on how their organizations have responded to the pandemic and how their work has contributed to building peace. We'll see examples of media content. We've got several videos lined up, and we're going to hear testimonials from the field as well as relevant research insights. We'll be starting with the panelists, who will be making about 15-minute presentations. We'll then have a 5-minute Q&A for each panelist. If you do have questions, please use the chat function, and we'll make sure that we get your questions to the panelist. So we'll work through the panelists like that, and then at the end we should have about 20 minutes left for a broader Q&A, and then I'll wrap it up. So we've got an hour and a half. With that, I'd like to introduce the panel, which is put together by 3 partners: BBC Media Action, which is the BBC's international development charity. We've got the Swiss-based NGO Fondation Hirondelle, which provides news to populations faced with crisis and supports local media and journalists in these fragile contexts. And finally, we've got the New Humanitarian, which is an independent nonprofit news organization specializing in covering crises and disasters to inform prevention and response. And from those organizations, we've got Caroline Villemain, who's the general director of Fondation Hirondelle. She joined Fondation Hirondelle in 2003 when she was in charge of the UN-supported Radio Okapi in the DRC. She's now the head of operations and has held that role since 2008. Maha Taki has over 10 years of experience in designing and managing complex media development and media for development projects. She joined BBC Media Action in 2009 and became director of projects for Lebanon and Syria, leading the development of a radio drama broadcast within Syria and aiming to foster a sense of shared experience and identity among its listeners. Alistair Stewart joined BBC Media Action over 5 years ago and is both Senior Governance Advisor and Senior Research Manager. He provides strategic advice and input on the organization's governance work and evidence, particularly around social cohesion, peace building, and countering mis- and disinformation. He also oversees BBC Media Action's audience research and impact evaluation across a number of countries. Finally, last but not least, we've got Sarah Noble, who is with the New Humanitarian. She joined that news organization in 2017 and heads up its external relations and communications portfolio. Sarah has over a decade of experience in strategic communication and engagement in the field of international peace and security, and previously worked at Interpeace in a number of key positions. So with that, welcome panelists. I'm looking forward to a fascinating discussion to hear about how the media has dealt with not only addressing and providing information to communities about COVID, but particularly how they've been able to do this in some of these more fragile settings. With that, I would like to introduce Caroline Villemain from Fondation Hirondelle. And Caroline, you will have about 15 minutes to make your presentation, then we'll have a 5-minute Q&A.
Thanks. Thank you, Michelle, and good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be on that panel. Thanks for inviting us. What I'd like to share with you today, based on the experience from Fondation Hirondelle, is really how that COVID crisis, especially in the most fragile context, is yet another layer of a crisis and a situation of fear, uncertainty, and rumors. You can imagine when one lives in Central African Republic or the DRC or in the Sahel in Mali, if I'm just taking African examples, daily concerns refer to security, access to basic services like accessing water, accessing health. And when a crisis like the pandemic arrives, suddenly there is yet a new, very heavy series of new factors to take into consideration, where people don't really know what's going on, rumors spread, and people have to adapt additionally to their daily concerns to this new crisis. So quality information in this context is important and can make a difference. And what we mean by quality information is working with local journalists on the ground in the local languages, working through media that people can actually access, which remains radio most of the time. And from that very rooted capacity, using journalism to provide facts to people and helping people go through their challenges and fears with facts and dialogue. Once people know what's going on, then they can discuss it and they can express their point of views and decide what to do. It's maybe a given for many of us that, you know, there is information and we can access it and we can know what's going on. But in this very fragile context, you have either media landscapes that are very poor in quality in terms of the kind of information you can access, or even worse, some parts of the country, remote areas, very marginalized part of population that don't even have access to any kind of information. And there the rumor can spread and the word of mouth replace the media. The challenges for the journalist is usually in this very fragile context, their personal safety, of course. You know, you may be living in a country where rebel groups or very various parts of the what compose the societies are fighting, and as a journalist, as a local journalist, you try to position yourself independently from these groups and you get under a lot of pressure. What we witnessed in many of our newsrooms with the COVID, that of course, personally, the journalists wanted to make sure they didn't get sick, so they would not be prevented from continuing informing the population and doing their job. But the many health ministries and other part of the authorities were not ready to face that additional health crisis. Information was hidden. It was very difficult to get regular figures on the cases, on the measures, and it took quite some time for these fragile authorities to be able to respond. I'd like to show a small movie from our experience in the Kasai. So the Kasai is a very big region from DRC. There we have a studio that was created a year and a half ago to provide information to people after a major violent conflict that took place between several ethnies. You will see there how the journalists have been able to do their work as best as possible and provide spaces for dialogue. So please enjoy.
Ngoma Kasai a permis à ma structure de pouvoir faire connaître ses activités au grand public. Ngoma Kasai a aussi tendu son micro aux survivantes de viols collectifs pour qu'elles puissent elles-mêmes s'exprimer en leurs propres termes pour expliquer la situation qu'elles ont vécue lors du conflit Kamwina-Nsapu.
Nous avons accepté de rediffuser gratuitement les émissions de Ngoma Kasai par le fait que notre province a traversé les moments de troubles et ces émissions, compte tenu de leur diversité, donnent la culture à la paix, à la concorde nationale pour que nous ne puissions pas revivre la situation que nous avons vécue.
Ngoma Kasai travaille dans le Kasai et le Kasai central pour impliquer les jeunes dans les efforts de paix et réconciliation après le conflit Kamwina-Nsapu de 2016 à 2018. Nous formons les journalistes sur les meilleures pratiques journalistiques. Nous insistons sur l'éthique, sur les valeurs d'indépendance, d'objectivité et d'équilibre des médias et des journalistes. Nous formons les directeurs des médias, des radios communautaires particulièrement, à une meilleure gestion de leurs radios. Nous espérons qu'un journaliste formé participe à donner la parole, à rendre leur dignité aux personnes qui ont subi les violences, aux personnes qui ont été les victimes collatérales de ces violences. Ça va aboutir à une expression libre de parole, notamment parmi nos débats d'Idion Chodiamou Kasai, qui signifie toutes les voix du Kasai. Et ce faisant, nous renforçons aussi une participation citoyenne à la démocratie.
So what I think is interesting with this example is to help answer how can we do it? How can we, as journalists, coming with only information in hands to help fragile societies go towards peace and help population trust the media and really consider the media as an ally to rebuild the links and the ties between the people. As you can see from that example, it really requires to imply many partners. You have the newsroom and the journalists that you have to train, of course, but you also have to rely from the local community media that will help you gather information since they are spread all over the place, but also will broadcast and be as close as possible from the audience. The proximity element is very important when you try to contribute to peace and to try to rebuild trust. Of course, this is an area where internet access, digital media, social media are not very present. So it's a media environment where disinformation, lies, rumors are spread either by traditional media like some community radios or private or commercial radio that belong to someone who has a personal interest versus a public interest, but also really the word of mouth, people meeting in the market or gathering at church and spreading rumors or things they have heard and they are not really sure. Nevertheless, as it was said in the video, the young people, as soon as they can connect with their phone, they will really want to try to go on Facebook, go on some of these platforms, and there too we train our journalists to help the young people identify what can be trusted, really analyze when a piece of information comes from, if it's been produced by someone reliable, and before sharing it, if this is something that will put oil on the fire or something that you can share with trust, and making sure that you will not divide even further your community. And here I have another example of a very short movie, kind of a mini training session that was made in Niger. It's in French, but it's very easy to follow, helping the young people in Niger. When the COVID started about 6 months ago, we did that production for Facebook to help people identify lies and disinformation from the productions they were looking at. Burkina Faso, my mistake. So the basic of journalism is to verify information, get several sources, and that's the daily business of any newsroom. This is the training the journalists receive. But what has been very specific with the COVID is that, again, in societies where many rumors go about everything, about the political situation, about the security situation, about any new movement from an armed group or something like that. When the health rumors came on the COVID, it was suddenly too many information to verify. So we developed additional resources in the newsroom, and with a hub working regionally from Dakar in Africa, that helped the newsroom really look at some of these health rumors and help them deconstruct these rumors and show either that the source was not reliable, or that the information was misleading, or that it was clearly manipulative. And our recommendation, if I may finish with this, is for any strategy that either the donors may have regarding a country or a situation like the pandemic, or a country that wants to develop its way to democracy and solid institutions, really take into consideration the role of the media as a sector. And consider media as an institution that needs to have a legal framework and a enabling environment where journalistic work can be done. This will contribute to peace-building efforts. It will contribute to many other objectives that you may have. And it's important that the media exists before the crisis, during and after the crisis. If you take the image of a hospital, if suddenly you need to treat a lot of people and the hospital is not ready, it has not been built, the people have not been trained, you cannot face the pandemic. The media is the same. We know that the infodemic that spread really needed strong media that were supported, that were already efficient, with trained journalists to respond to the pandemic. And investing in media contributes to deal with crisis, and if you're a very fragile environment, contribute to any efforts around cohesion, national cohesion, and peaceful dialogue. I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Caroline. We now have about 5 minutes for questions from, it looks like there is probably close to 40 people out there in our virtual conference room. So I invite you to type in your questions into the chat box. While we're waiting for some questions from all of you, Caroline, you mentioned a couple things that I'd like to follow up on. One of them is this issue of trust. And I'm wondering if you can go a little deeper into that and talk about somewhere like Central African Republic. You just came back from there earlier today. And, you know, Bangui is known as the city of rumors. How do you combat that? How do you build trust in that kind of an environment when you're dealing with a pandemic around which there is so much mis and disinformation?
Yes, well, as you know, it does take time to build trust, and it takes 1 second to just break it. The way we build the trust with our audience or the public we want to reach is, again, to use the local languages. I think it's very important for people to be 100% comfortable with the words, with the images, everything that is used either orally or in a written form, according to their culture, to what they know. Of course, working with facts, because a fact is something that people can verify, and if you tell them this is what happened, they will check and they will say, yes, this is what happened. And the trust is built little by little like this. Also, making sure that everyone has access to the information. If, like in Central African Republic, you know, there is a very strong division currently between the capital, Bangui, and the rest of the country. It is estimated that the government only controls 20% of the country right now, which is the capital and a little bit around. So if you just inform the capital and you don't inform people which are in the north and the east or the west, the mistrust will be even further strong, between the people. And so broadcasting the same information at the same time for the whole population helps people know what's going on, and being sure they are not manipulated. They get that information at the same time than the others. So it's not because they are from the north that they hear that, or because they are from Bangui. It's because they are Central African and they all have the right and deserve that information. And that respecting and giving that dignity to the people really help building the trust.
Fantastic. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions here from, whoa, they're flying in now, the questions are. So I've got one here from Amanda Lowry. I'm assuming that I can say names. Due to resources in fragile contexts, is radio broadcasting the most reliable and cost-effective way to communicate with communities? Or are there other resources or tools that are increasingly becoming normal?
I think radio really remains the most reliable media for many reasons. In terms of the technology that is used, it's really a low-cost technology for the audience. People have an FM receiver. You just need battery. You don't need to charge like a phone and, you know, requesting regular power and so forth. It's, of course, mobile. You take it with you, and you can, if you're in a taxi or at the market, you can have it with you and listen to the information. The proximity also is an asset of radio. Again, languages, people that don't have literacy skills can easily access the radio. And the third element, I think, is also about personal security, and something that maybe in fragile contexts we don't really think about, but protection of personal data. If you use your telephone to access information, it means that you bought a SIM card, which means that you are registered somewhere with a cell phone company. And in many of these very fragile countries, the cell phone companies are close to the government. And at any time, they can give the names of their subscribers or of the people that have a SIM card. And we never know what the government does with that information.
Excellent. Thank you. That's our really quick 5-minute Q&A. There's several more questions for you, Caroline, that I'm sure that all our panelists will be able to address in our final Q&A at the end of the session. So thank you very much, Caroline. That was very, very interesting to hear what Fondation Hirondelle is doing.
Thank you.
Next, we have the dynamic duo, Alistair Stewart and Maha Taki from BBC Media Action. I will throw it to both of you to take it away for the next 15 minutes.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Carolyn, and everybody joining online. And it's great to see questions coming in, which we can come back to at the end. Just quickly, for any of you that don't know us, as Michelle said, we're BBC Media Action's the international development organisation of the BBC. We work in over 20 countries worldwide, and we use creative communication, trusted media, and partnerships with both local and national broadcasters to address various development issues around our main areas of governance, including work around conflict prevention, health, and also resilience and humanitarian response. And last year we reached over 100 million people with our programming. And we also do strengthening of the capacity of journalists, and also working with others in media communication through training and long-term mentoring. So how have we been responding to the pandemic? Well, I think, first of all, kind of despite all the logistical challenges, we managed to pivot many of our projects and our work with local partners very quickly, actually, to respond to the need of audiences, primarily around the need for information in relation to COVID-19. So capitalizing on the existing relationships and engagement and trust that we'd built up with audiences over periods of time, and using that to give them the factually accurate information around prevention and also what to do in case of symptoms of COVID-19. But as the pandemic's evolved, our focus is very much broadened out to look at addressing wider impacts of the pandemic. So, for example, work around stigmatization of certain groups for spreading the virus, looking at how the situation is affecting social cohesion dynamics in various countries, and also looking at things like how the pandemic's affecting people's livelihoods and providing them with as much useful information and advice about how to cope with this. So all of this really taps into our long-standing work related to conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and peace building, where we use mass media, digital content, and also outreach work to provide people with accurate, credible, and balanced information at scale. Also helping to dispel rumours and addressing disinformation, empowering people so that they understand their rights, understand the issues that are affecting their lives, and creating that space where there's inclusive discussion about the issues that people are facing, and encouraging more peaceful exchange of views around issues. Enabling ordinary citizens to demand answers and justice from those in positions of power, and encouraging accountability. And we've seen the importance of that around responses to COVID-19, both from governments, but also from aid organisations. Work that helps to shift attitudes and social norms around violence. So, for example, by modelling non-violent approaches to conflict resolution through dramas that we produce. And also looking to improve social cohesion and tolerance in the various places that we work. And as I said, that we've seen the importance of that in relation to COVID-19. I wanted to play you a short clip. So this is from our editor of our El Cool Facebook page in Libya. She's also called Libya. She's discussing how they've been responding to COVID-19 there. El Cool is a youth-focused Facebook page, which we've been running for over 5 years, and it's one of the most popular social media pages in Libya. If we could play the clip, please.
Since 2014, BBC's media action project, known as Al-Kull social media platform, have been working on delivering its audiences stories and working on being the safe platform for them to express their own opinions. We tell stories of social cohesion, diversity, peace-building efforts, and stories of women, youth, and disabled challenges and successes. Al-Kull provides its audiences with reliable and impartial information, wide range of diverse views and opinions to empower them to make their own opinions and understandings based on knowledge. We use audiences research to help us understand the needs of our followers and what they want from the media. We also reach out to our audiences through our network of journalists on the ground. Practicing all of this throughout the years enabled us to respond to the pandemic by providing reliable information on how the virus spreads, on how can you and your family stay safe, information on the Libyan authorities' respond to COVID-19 to be able to hold government actors account, fact-checked data to dispel myths and rumors about the spread of the virus, and creating a sense of shared community and connections across Libya at a time of isolations and divisions. And finally, by providing two-way communication, by responding to our audience's questions through our bots and generating discussions and dialogues on our Facebook page. My name is Libya Dries, and I'm Al-Kull editor.
About what we've been doing in Libya. I wanted to, we've mentioned the issue of disinformation a few times, as did Libya in that video, and I wanted to touch on that a bit more. So we know this is a huge problem, it's not a new problem, but I think all of this has been illustrated further by the pandemic. It's an issue which we've been working on for a long time. But I think we'd agree it really needs a holistic approach from lots of different sectors and disciplines. But in terms of the role that we think media and communication can play around this, as we've been discussing, obviously our first step is about providing people with accurate, trustworthy and relevant information. But as Carolyn was alluding to earlier, we need to make sure this is done in a way that engages audiences so they can actually compete against the misinformation online. And to think about how best we do that, we need to be thinking about who we use to communicate information. So making sure we're using trusted and influential voices, providing clear, simple, precise and actionable information, grounding what we're doing in the local culture and reality of people's lives, and using local languages. And also, I think importantly, rooting our response around this based on an understanding of what's driving consumption and sharing of disinformation in any particular context. So what are people's fears? What are their desires? What are their priorities? What is it that's driving their engagement with false information? To give you a kind of practical example of this, I guess, grounding this work in local culture, I wanted to play a short clip from our work in Iraq, where we worked with our long-standing media partner there, Radio Al Mirabad, to produce this song, which explains the need for a local lockdown in Baghdad and encourages people there to support the medical services. It's been extremely popular. It's now had over 7 million views online, and it's even been played in hospitals and in communities in Baghdad. If we could play the clip.
حظر التجول من ورا كورونا والدنيا مذعورة ومسجونة وتقيني تلاقيني بالخفارة يم المرض واخطاره وبحسبة الميتين والصيدلاني والمعاون كلها لأجل خدمة المواطن وبرغم قلة الأدوية مستمرين شوف الدول الأقوى من عندنا بس هالمرض طببهم بمحنة والهسه عدنا كم واحد ما ملتزمين عينونا تعبنا لا تضيعونا أهلنا ينتظرونا نرجع لهم طيبين شوف همي أرد لأبوي وأمي والفيروس بجسمي تخيل وضعيتين
حظر التجول من ورا كورونا
والدنيا مقفولة ومسجونة. انذار جيش وشرطة وياهم أبو المرور، احنا أمن بس نخدم الصحة. داعش قبل هسه العدو قاحة. ما نريد أي شي منكم لكن ابقوا بالدور. وتقيني تلاقيني بالشارع واللي نلقى طالع انقلعت للبيت. كل قافل بالسيطرة يجادل يمكن للمرض حامل معناها ننعديت. خليكم بالبيت خليكم يا رب احنا نحميكم والله اللي يحمينا. واحجوها عائلتك احجوها فتروح نعبوها تبقى على وعينا. حظر التجول من ورا كورونا والدنيا مذعورة.
Thanks. So yeah, hopefully a good example of kind of grounding what we're doing in local context, and I'd certainly say across our COVID work, we've seen that when we've done that in the various countries where we've been working, that's really helped to drive engagement with our content. I think going beyond that, you know, I think obviously there's an important role around fact and source checking approaches, but I think in terms of our thinking and all of this, I think we're moving not beyond that. I think it's still important, but we need to recognize that that's an inherently reactive approach. There's a lot of work that's been done and is still being done around critical media and digital literacy, and we think that's very important and needs to continue and increase. But increasingly, we're thinking about how do you go a bit beyond that. It's all right, Michelle. We need to be trying to go beyond just media and digital literacy and looking at trying to shape culture around information consumption, production, and sharing. So thinking about how we can influence people's attitudes and beliefs and societal norms in relation to this. So this will vary a lot by country, by culture, by context, but you know, things such as beliefs and norms around what safe and responsible information consumption actually looks like, the acceptability of sharing or acting on information that's unconfirmed or known to be false, social norms around the importance of having good media literacy and a varied media diet, and also the kind of value that people place on quality news and journalism. And we know from our experience of designing social behavior change communication on lots of thematic areas that you know these are things that we can have influence on, and we can change people's attitudes and norms and ultimately behavior. So there's real scope to apply these approaches to this issue. This brings us just onto our third point. So obviously all of this is quite reliant on there being public interest media in the first place, which we've alluded to a bit, but I'll hand over to Maha on this bit.
Thanks, Alistair. Hi, everyone. So as Alistair mentioned, at BBC Media Action, we do use media and communication to inform, connect, and empower people. So this is some of our work is around communication for development. But to achieve lasting impact, we believe that it is important that the media in the countries in which we work are able to play that ongoing role in meeting public needs. So the clip you just saw from Al Mirbad, the song around Corona, this was a piece that was produced with very little support from us. This is a radio station that is meeting public needs, that is a public service or public interest media outlet. We've been supporting it for 15 years. At the beginning, we did a lot of support on editorial and production and content. Now, really, we just support it financially. So this brings me to the challenges facing media. We all know there's an economic crisis. It was pretty concerning before the pandemic. The pandemic has made it even worse. Just last month, maybe you've seen the research from Columbia University and the International Center for Journalists published a survey of more than 1,400 media respondents from 125 countries. They found that 40% of those who responded reported revenue was down by more than half, with almost 1/5 saying it was down more than 75%. And the number one priority identified was to secure funding to survive. So we're facing what some are labeling now a media extinction event in low-income countries and conflict-affected countries. Business models there were already precarious. There was already very little advertising income. And at the same time, we all know that there is evidence that countries that have a free and plural media have less corruption, more peaceful societies, and accountable democracies. So the consequences of this financial crisis and the media disappearing are quite profound. So to tackle this, we do need to understand these structural challenges. And I'm going to talk about two examples of how we're trying to tackle this financial existential problem to media in our project. So the first one I'll talk about is Primed, titled Primed. It's Protecting Independent Media for Effective Development. It's a program that we've got that's funded by the UK government, and it's really an unprecedented collaboration and partnership. It's pretty much brought together about 7 international media development organizations, loads of local partners in Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Bangladesh. And the idea is to bring all of our learning together, all of our experiences together, and find fresh solutions to sustaining viable media ecosystems in these countries. And it's also looking at how COVID-19 is likely to impact the viability of public interest media and how the media development sector and the media sector in general can respond. A major component of this project is a learning initiative. So we're trying to generate evidence from these 3 very different countries we're working in, including Zambia and Iraq as case studies as well. And the aim is to communicate this to a broader media development sector, to policymakers and to practitioners in low-income countries. So this is a project that started in October, and it's a 3-year project. Another initiative, and this is more of a policy initiative rather than a project, is we'll just first to introduce it. I think we all know that media support is very, very minute when it comes to support for development. So systematic support to media only represents 0.3% of ODA spending, according to OECD DAC. It's poorly coordinated, and we know that many donors find it political and complex. Now, in many places where we work, advertising markets are minuscule and sometimes corrupt or controlled by government. There's just not a business model to sustain media. So it's not just that revenues have fallen, it's that there wasn't enough revenue to begin with. Revenues generated from online advertising is also minuscule because of the tariffs allocated to low-income countries. So you'd have, the 7 million hit of this video on YouTube wouldn't generate a lot of money in a place like Iraq. So where there is market failure, we're calling it market failure, we're looking at finding fresh non-market solutions to the economic problem. So we've proposed the creation of an international fund for public interest media to help with this. So this is an initiative aimed to provide funding to media and improve coordination amongst donors to support this. It's been Luminate funded us to put together a feasibility study, which we finished last year and which we're happy to share with whoever's interested. And it had very promising results. Now, startup funding has been secured from Luminate and MacArthur Foundation. A founding secretariat is being formed, and we're recruiting an executive director. To say it's now being led by Luminate, not by the BBC Media Action. It was an idea we initiated and wrote the feasibility study. And the aim of it is to raise 100 million for supporting media. So I'll end there, and thank you very much for hearing us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alistair and Maha. One of the questions that came through a little while ago was about, to what extent is there coordination or cooperation between media development organizations? And I think the Primed program is probably a good example of that. There is cooperation, there is coordination, definitely within the sector. Of course, there could always be more, but there is substantial work going on in that area. One of the questions that came in a little bit earlier as well, and let me know, Alistair and Maha, if you think you'd want to tackle this one, and then I've another question I have for you. But Kyle Dietrich asks, how do you balance amplifying credible voices in conflict environments when moderate voices are often not seen as credible to radicalized individuals or militants? A really important question, I think, for some of the environments in which you all work.
Yeah, it's a good question. And hello, Kyle. Hope you're well. Yes, I saw that question and I was having to think about how we approach it. I think in a lot of our work is about giving space to a range of voices. So in a lot of our factual programming, our kind of programming encouraging discussion in any context where we're working on, our aim is not necessarily to promote particular voices. It's more to improve the diversity of voices that you have in any particular space. But then, you know, when you're looking at who's best to disseminate key information, I think we'd be doing a careful assessment of that and looking at, you know, who are the best people to do that are maybe not radicalized. But then if our assessment is that those people are mainly radicalized groups or leaders of conflict groups, whoever, then I think that's when we'd look more at our more kind of non-factual approaches to looking at this. So in a lot of places we use drama in a way that we can, in a sense, you can give a different voice to the people that we know are influential. So in Myanmar, for example, we use our dramas there to model, I guess, like religious leaders, ethnic leaders, having what might not be a typical opinion of a religious or ethnic leader in that community. But in terms of the drama, that's still the influential voice that we're using. So I think that's certainly one of the ways that we try to get around that.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that came through, and this touches on the issue of viability. Maha, maybe you can tackle this one. We know that many journalists, I would say most journalists in a lot of these environments in which we work, make very little pay. Their salaries are sometimes $100 a month, maybe $150. And so as a result, there's a lot of envelopes being passed and whatnot. Every country has its own words for that to describe that. Chris Church asks, how do you reduce bribing or coercion of media in conflict environments to cover news with a particular bias?
Thank you for that question. And yes, I think it's really important and it speaks to the core issue. I think we try and tackle the core issue, which is that there's not enough, they're not paid enough, and there's financial issues at stake. So, I mean, there's never going to be enough. We're never going to change that aspect of it. What we've tried to do is find non-market solutions to the issues of viability. So we're looking, for example, in places where there is political will, to see whether governments can reduce some of the costs associated with running an organization. So, for example, in Sierra Leone, we're looking at whether license fees can be reduced. It could be something like that. It doesn't have to be a direct funding from the state. We're also looking at how we can, we've got, we can get grants given to organizations through intermediaries in the countries that we work in. The International Fund for Public Interest that I've just been speaking about is another kind of solution. So we are trying to find these kind of non-market driven solutions to the problem of viability so we can improve the viability of organizations and the situation of journalists all around.
Excellent, thank you. I'm sorry, my dog has decided to join us for a few minutes. Let me just introduce Sarah Noble from the New Humanitarian, who will be our last speaker. And then we'll do 5 minutes of Q&A with Sarah, and then we'll open up to more questions at the end. Thanks again, Alistair and Maha. Sarah, take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. And it's great to be with Caroline, Alistair, and Maha, Fondation Hirondelle and BBC Media Action. So we've seen very many similar trends. We've seen that the media, fact and truth have come on constant attack, fueled by dangerous rhetoric about fake news at a time when it's really crucial for people to have access to reliable information. So for us as an independent nonprofit newsroom, covering humanitarian crises that are often forgotten or are underreported around the world. We're really concerned about these trends that we're seeing. But at the same time, this year we've seen that there's actually a growing appetite for reliable information about crises. So the pandemic has actually heightened interest in our beat of humanitarian crises. And we were fortunate enough to still be able to continue reporting on the crises that are often missing from mainstream media coverage. So as a remote and decentralized newsroom, our editorial team was very quick to be able to adapt to what COVID means, or adapt its coverage to what COVID means for people in existing crises, while at the same time continuing to shine a spotlight on other ongoing crises happening around the world. So the edit team really had to balance, this big focus on COVID as the pandemic was spreading around the world, with also keeping a spotlight on all of the other crises. And safety precautions, of course, were a concern for our journalists from the start. We wondered how safe it would be for our contributors, journalists who live in the countries where they cover, to report. And when we couldn't be on the ground, we tried to conduct our reporting remotely or tapping into networks with firsthand views of what was happening. And we were able to experiment with some formats like our first person pieces, where people who live in crises were able to tell their stories in their own words. So it was also an opportunity for us to better reflect the voices of the communities that we're trying to serve through our journalism. Another interesting thing, this isn't only true for ourselves, but we saw a massive surge in website visitors. This is true for newsrooms around the world, but we doubled in monthly views, and from about 170,000 users per month in 2019 to 380,000 in 2020 so far. And in May, it was at 636,000 users. So we saw a big COVID spike. And now obviously the challenge is trying to continue to keep those people that are interested in this important coverage, it continue to be engaged. And because we are a small nonprofit newsroom, we were actually able to pivot some of our planned work. This is our 25th anniversary. We decided not to celebrate it because at the time it didn't feel like that was appropriate, but we were actually able to reframe it as a new series called Rethinking Humanitarianism, that's taking a look at how aid is being delivered in light of COVID, in light of what Black Lives Matter mean for the humanitarian sector. And we also were able to continue our coverage of women and girls through a new series that we launched called She Said, that's looking at what the impact of the pandemic was on women and girls in conflict-affected situations. Another thing that we've done this year, which is we've partnered with the Stanley Center for Peace and Security on a project called Beyond the Bang Bang, reporting from the front lines of peace. So this is looking at the flip side of humanitarian disaster, which is normally the center focus of our coverage. And it's looking at attempts at healing and redemption, with the focus on the triple nexus, sort of the fusion of peace, development, and humanitarianism. And I have a clip from one of our editors, Erwin Loy, who is our Asia editor. Unfortunately, because of the time difference, he wasn't able to join, but he's pre-recorded something. So if we could show that, that would be great. Please.
Hi, I'm Erwin Loy, the New Humanitarians Asia editor based in Bangkok. I'm sorry I couldn't be there live, but I wanted to share some of my perspectives on the role of media in reporting on crises during the pandemic and our approach to reporting on not just conflict, but also peace. So I think with the mainstream media coverage, it's always built around tension and conflict. It's what goes wrong often instead of what works. I think it's unrealistic to expect this to change to a significant degree, but I think we can make a more concerted effort to also talk about what works or what could work. Conflict is inherent in whatever we cover, but there are also people trying to prevent it, to build bridges, and to promote peace. And so we're trying to recognize this with our new stream of reporting on peace building, which is just underway. And it's very much a work in progress, but I'll talk a bit about some of that. One example is recently we did a story examining why a COVID-19 ceasefire seems to have failed in southern Thailand's conflict. A separatist movement in Thailand announced a ceasefire early on in the pandemic, but it wasn't reciprocated by the Thai military, and violence has continued and things are essentially status quo. The pandemic itself wasn't really a catalyst for peace, though many people were hoping it might be. So we covered this, but in separate stories, we also pointed to how the views of young people in southern Thailand are also changing, that there's this growing belief that peace is possible, and some are working toward it. In a separate story, we also talked with women who are trying to build peace and understanding from the ground up. Essentially, they're stepping in where some of the top-down political negotiations have failed so far. I think, generally speaking, the challenge is that journalists often think of these sorts of stories as soft if there isn't tension. So it's a question of how to examine these issues and also present the flip side of conflict in a way that doesn't feel unrealistically rosy. And as I said, I think this is very much a work in progress. Even in this example, I think you sort of see the tensions between the traditional way of reporting on conflict and what we're trying to do as well. I think in a similar way, we see our coverage of local humanitarian response achieving a similar goal over the longer term. This is our project looking at local aid. This started as a project examining the humanitarian sector's localization agenda, sort of highlighting some of the grassroots work that takes place in every crisis and some of the policy issues around it. But over time, this has grown to inform our other reporting as well. I think, international media reporting on crises, a lot of times people end up quoting, primarily UN agencies, INGOs, because, these agencies have large communications departments, they have up-to-date information, and journalists are working on deadlines. It's often the easiest way to go when you have only a couple hours to put out a story, something like that. But unintentionally, I think this also portrays local communities in crisis as being only passive recipients of aid. So we're sort of aiming for a reporting that doesn't buy into these assumptions by being a bit more conscious of who's quoted as experts and analysts in our stories, to show that local communities are also actively working toward making change themselves, which is the way things have always been in every crisis, as we know. So these local responders might not identify as peace builders, but many are essentially taking on these roles. I think of women-led networks in the Pacific Islands. These are community groups who share resources within their villages to avoid conflict when food is scarce. I think of NGOs in Mindanao in the Philippines who cross religious and cultural divides as part of their work, even if their mandate isn't inherently peace. Those are just a few examples. And lastly, we've been running first-person pieces written by people who are from the communities that we often cover. A recent example was a Rohingya man living in Bangladesh refugee camps, Mohammed Arfat. He was talking about how an internet ban was affecting his ability to spread information on the coronavirus. We've also run a piece on a Sudanese refugee on lockdown in Libya. And recently we ran a long-form piece from a Yemeni doctor. This was essentially an audio diary spanning several weeks in his life, documenting his daily life and emotions. And this was as the severity of the coronavirus was becoming clear. I think these first-person pieces are a good way of bringing local voices to a wider audience, especially during the pandemic when there's this information overload at times. And I think a voice from the ground helps cut through the noise. And so it's something that we're trying to do more of in our coming coverage through 2021. So those are just a few thoughts on our approach to reporting during the pandemic. Thanks for your time.
There we go. So that was Erwin Loy, who is our Asia editor. So just to quickly recap, COVID has really increased interest in our coverage. It's also led us to look at whose voices we are amplifying, as Erwin was saying. And kind of the third point, which is something that Maha brought up, is the whole media ecosystem and the impact of COVID on newsrooms and on their revenues. There doesn't seem to be a solid business model for public service journalism, be it in conflict-affected zones or elsewhere, if I could perhaps say that. We're a small nonprofit newsroom. Our current funding model is long-term grants, which has enabled us to weather the COVID storm, but obviously that's not going to last forever. So I think this is a kind of a key challenge for us to unlock, not only for the media sector, but really for democracy and for peace building. And perhaps there's never been a more crucial time for us to work together to overcome these difficulties, because this work and journalism and truth matters.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm wondering, you mentioned this big COVID spike, and several of you have mentioned, issues of viability in the media sector, particularly in conflict-affected settings. And I'm wondering if is there, and maybe I'm trying to put two questions together, but I'm wondering if there's some way that, working to engage audiences and increased audience participation, is that some way that could help address questions of viability?
So one of the things that we've tried to do this year in terms of our audience, so our audience are primarily based in Europe and in North America. That's perhaps a bit different in terms of how we fit in the media puzzle with Fondation Hirondelle and BBC Media Action. One of the things that we've tried to do this year is actually to better engage with our audience. So we started a membership program, which was not so much aimed at generating revenue, but it was more about engaging with our audiences, making sure that our readers are closer to our subject matter, and also that we understand our readers and what they are interested in. So that has been kind of a pilot for this year, and we'll see where that goes. But I'm not sure that's the full answer. And I don't actually have the answer. So if anybody has, I'm not sure anybody has the answer. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, it's a tricky question, and I think the new humanitarian, you said it well. The new humanitarian is a completely different beast, really, than Fondation Hirondelle or BBC Media Action. I was really happy to hear Erwin talking about this Local Voices initiative and trying to reach a wider audience. And this is something that I've been kind of grappling with and thinking about for some time. This local global connection or global local connection, and we're dealing with this global pandemic, but perhaps it's affecting communities in different ways. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how we can connect the local and the global from the perspective of the new humanitarian.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's something that we're actually trying to do more of in the future. I mean, when in the pieces in our journalistic pieces that we produce, we always look for local voices and to make sure that the communities that we're serving are represented. But this is something that we actually want to do more of. I think the humanitarian sector in and of itself is having a reckoning in terms of what racism means, what the Black Lives Matter mean for the sector. I think also the media sector has issues in terms of how to decolonize the newsroom. What does that actually mean? I know there are a lot of perhaps challenges around the word decolonization, but how do we ensure that the voices that we want to elevate are represented? And we are also in the process now of thinking, is this a different part of our site? Can we do more first person articles as a way of bringing these voices to the fore? But it's something that we feel is quite important, and unfortunately in other media, local people aren't cited, and that's a big challenge.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Your comment about decolonizing the newsroom, I think, is right on target. And I'm thinking also about decolonizing media development, which makes me think about I'm sitting here in the United States, and I look around what's happening in this country right now, and what then will be the role of the United States in media development coming forward? I think this country has lost a lot of credibility. So I think that's probably another session to have in the future and talk about that. I would now like to open it up to the floor and to the entire panel. Thanks again, Sarah, for that, and thank you, Erwin, virtually. And we've got about 15 to 20 minutes for questions. I will scroll through and see. I know somebody wanted the link to the Iraqi song. I know, Alistair, you did throw up a couple of links in the chat. Here's an interesting question I'm going to throw out there from Peter Pinar. I'm curious about exposure and measuring exposure to the media. And I would love to hear your thoughts about sharing media outputs through non-traditional means such as WhatsApp. I don't know who wants to take that one on.
I can certainly.
Caroline or Alistair?
Yeah, after.
Yeah, can certainly start. Yeah, I mean, we put a lot of importance on measuring both the reach, but also looking at audience engagement and then impact of our content, of our programs, using various different ways of doing that. Kind of with traditional media, that often involves large-scale surveys comparing outcomes, impact against audiences who have watched or listened to our programs, especially those that do so regularly, comparing them with people that haven't, whilst controlling for similar factors that might affect that, such as education, gender, that kind of thing. But yeah, increasingly we're looking more at kind of how do you measure success in the digital realm? So looking at things like more experimental designs online, using randomized control trials with digital content which we're producing, testing that, adapting it, to see what works. We haven't really measured reach through kind of dark social like WhatsApp. It's quite difficult to do that, but certainly in terms of dissemination, I think it's an interesting space, and one that we're thinking about more and more, how we can use it and try and encourage the sharing of our content now.
Caroline, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, like Alistair said, measuring, first of all, that you are heard, read, viewed is very important. It's the basic of the media system to measure the audience and the reach. So with the new platforms, the one you can access, like Facebook, and you can know the number of likes and accounts and followers, but with WhatsApp, unless it's a WhatsApp group that you administer, you don't know the WhatsApp groups, and you ethically cannot join to measure a WhatsApp group that was not created for you to be in. So we've been trying to think with many researchers, especially in DRC, how to access these WhatsApp groups that are supposedly very important, but if you're not part of that community, how do you integrate it ethically? What we have been doing in Burkina Faso is using WhatsApp to get feedback from IDPs. You may know that the situation in Burkina Faso is very fragile, with many citizens and women, children, men from the Sahel region having to be displaced because of insecurity. We have developed a specific program, information program for them, and we have identified within the camps people that first were volunteer and secondly could use the WhatsApp technology, and every month they send feedback to the researchers who are mandated to evaluate the relevance, the clarity, and the use of the production. So that's a new way for us, and so far it's working quite good, because people can voice their message, they don't have to write, and that's the good thing with WhatsApp. You provide credit and a small solar charger for the phone, and it brings quite some autonomy to the people who use it.
Thanks, Caroline. This leads me to a question that I have, and then there's a related question from the audience. We've talked about the importance, the role of the media in building peace in some of these countries in which we work, and I'm wondering then how are we able to measure that impact? How are we able to measure change in attitude? I'm not even talking about change in behavior. I'm talking about change in attitude. So that's kind of question one. And then Miriamta Dadal, I'm sorry if I massacred your voice, asks, when aiming for change in a society, how can we measure the tipping point? In other words, of the % of audience reached, perhaps, before that change can happen. So a related question there, and I'm wondering who wants to take that one on.
I can take the second bit because I attempted to answer it in the comments. So I think it's a very good question, but in terms of actually knowing what the tipping point is of the number, the percentage of a population that need to see or to watch or listen to something and be impacted by it to see change, I think that's a very difficult question to answer because it's very specific on the context. It's impacted by what else is going on in that context, other media, but also other interventions, and it depends what issue you're looking at. So I don't think there's not a single answer for all media communication projects. That said, in our research, certainly we look carefully at the percentage, the proportion of any target population that we do reach, and we also look at trying to measure what's the situation before we start our intervention and how does that change over time, and comparing that, and also comparing that to people that haven't been exposed to our programming, so we can try to get the best sense of what impact our programming has. But yeah, I don't think there's a kind of a clear answer on tipping points.
Thanks, Alistair. Caroline, go ahead.
If I may, I totally agree with Alistair, and especially using the word impact, which implies a long-term perspective from a baseline to an end line. I'm very cautious. I don't know in other sector, but in the media development sector, we never get the funding nor the vision from the study analysis to go back 15, 20 years down the road and ask people if what they had perceived or what they had learned is still part of them, and if their behavior has changed or not changed because they still believe this is how they should behave. So, but what I wanted to say is we have seen in a more short-term aspect, especially, for instance, around electoral programs, where the media contributes to explain the process, really with civic and voter education programs, really step by step help people at least go to vote. And so we have had some studies where we were asking people if the programming they heard helped them decide to go and vote, and usually it is yes. And just the act of going to vote when you're in a very fragile context where your security is at risk, I think that's an achievement. It's maybe not a long-term impact, but that's an achievement, and that's measurable.
Thank you, Caroline. Sarah.
Thank you. No, I agree with Caroline and what Alistair has said. I think one of the other challenges when you're talking about the media is obviously journalism is a public good in and of itself. And as media organizations, is our purpose to produce journalism, which is in and of itself a public good, or is it journalism for change? And I think that within the media sector, there's an ongoing debate about that. At the New Humanitarian, obviously, we have a journalism for a higher purpose. And so we try to measure our impact. Obviously, it's quite challenging, but given that one of our aims is to hold power to account and to influence policymakers, we try to look at how our investigations are leading to change and what the outcome of it is. For example, this year we published an investigation together with the Thomson Reuters Foundation that looked at sexual abuse by aid workers in the DRC during the Ebola pandemic. And obviously we in terms of measuring the impact, we looked at how that story was picked up by mainstream media around the world, but then also how the aid agencies are now conducting their own investigations. The president of the DRC was interested to hold those responsible to account. There have been different parliamentary inquiries that we have testified at. So that, in a way, is how we're trying to measure our impact. But obviously, as a small newsroom, it's also very difficult to do that. And we also rely a lot on information that our readers provide us in terms of what change they've seen based on the content that we're producing. And we also rely on audience surveys as well to get that information.
Michelle,
Interesting. Thanks, Sarah. Yes, Maha, go ahead.
I can kind of speak to the first part of the question, which was much more about how do we do it rather than how do we measure it. And I can just give the example of the radio drama that you mentioned actually when you were introducing me, and that we did in Syria. And I'm not saying, we don't have, it was very, very difficult to do, and it was very difficult to measure, especially given it was a conflict. It was in the middle of the conflict that we did it. What we tried to do, what we realized very quickly is that the media is really fragmented, and people were only listening to media that agreed with their views, and that was, owned or led by a side that they were on. So people were not listening to the opposite view or the other view. So what we wanted to do first and foremost was find a platform that brought everybody together. And we couldn't find a local platform that brought everyone together. So we ended up actually broadcasting on BBC Arabic. And we were lucky that we had that platform. And we did 150 episodes of a radio drama where it was set in a fictional area in Damascus, where we tried to get people from the fictional area had people from different sides of the conflict, and we just tried to depict daily life, daily struggle from people from different sides. And we also did at the back of that a discussion program where we got people to come in and speak about some of the issues that mattered to Syria at that point, child labor, child abuse, all of this kind of really big issues. And if I'm to say which worked better in that setting, I think it was the drama, because there was so little of that. Seeing other people who are like them, emotionally connecting to them. There was a lot of news, there was a lot of fact, there was a lot of discussion programs already out there. So I think as a methodology that worked. How we measured it was very difficult, as I said, because we couldn't go inside Syria, and we didn't want put people at risk by doing focus groups inside Syria. So we did do a few, but it wasn't enough to give us, data that we could, put out there.
Thank you, Maha. Really, really interesting examples. And BBC Media Action does quite a bit of this drama, and you're finding that they're quite successful in reaching your audiences, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And if I may do a quick
Yes.
plug, there's actually another session starting at 9 p.m. our time, so in about 40 minutes, with another one of our colleagues, Anna Godfrey, who's our head of evidence. It's looking at interventions around social cohesion and our reflections around how you can use the power of drama, the power of narratives to look at social cohesion. So if people are interested in that, I suggest maybe checking out that session as well.
Thanks, Alistair. Thank you. I'm just going through to see what other questions I've got. I've got a question here from Chris Church. I'm thinking, Sarah, this one's going to be for you, but let's see. Western media coverage on conflict has substantial impact, especially on some INGOs, governmental actors, donors, etc. What is being done to reduce Western bias in its media coverage of conflict?
That's a great question. I think one of the challenges actually that we see is that Western coverage of conflict has decreased. I think if you look over the past few years at international crises and conflicts, they're few and far between in terms of having in-depth information. I think part of the challenge related to the business model that Maha was talking about is the lack of overseas correspondence and access to quality information. This highlights not to plug the new humanitarian, but obviously this highlights the importance of independent newsrooms. So I think that this is quite a challenge actually in terms of where people get their news from. In one of our reader surveys that we did earlier this year, there was a feeling amongst our readers that international coverage of humanitarian crises was not in depth, even if there was a great desire for this type of coverage. Obviously, that's bias coming from our own readers, but I think there's a bit of a discrepancy between what people want to read and what the international media has available to them. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. Did anybody else want to jump in on that one? Anybody have any thoughts? Nope. Okay, I'm just gonna, I believe that is, those are the most of the questions that we had coming in from the audience. I'm gonna do a quick scroll here.
Michelle, I did
yes,
see one maybe I could comment on. I think there was a question around, I guess it's like information fatigue. So the issue of people getting bored or tired of all the data on COVID, and how do you frame approaches when people are tired of that or overloaded with information? It's a very good question. I think very important issue, but I think it links back to some of what we were saying about disinformation, but how you provide this kind of information on anything really. Certainly in relation to COVID, we've done quite a lot of research trying to better understand what is it that audiences are worried about, or how can you best frame it to them that will actually make them interested in what it is that you're communicating to them. So if you can frame the information in a way that's more relevant to how they might engage with it, that's how to connect with them. So, rather than saying there are thousands of cases in your community, make it about, what's the best way to protect your family from the risk. So making it more personal, framing it in ways that they're more likely to engage with.
Thanks, Alistair. Caroline.
Thanks. Yeah, just to jump on this, we mainly work in sub-Saharan Africa, where locally the pandemic is not as heavy as in Asia or in Europe or in the Americas. And it's very difficult because keeping the right balance in terms of the topics that are of interest to the people, that concern their daily lives. And, the tendency right now is really to put the COVID at the bottom of the list because it's not in people's daily life and concerns, and they really think they are immune against it, and it's not a fear for them. While at the same time there are still cases and a lot of imported cases from Europe and other places, and the newsroom really face that fine line between keeping on making sure that it is understood how to protect yourself, what you need to do, and so forth, and not just tiring people with the topic. And one of the approach we have implemented is really to look at now the socioeconomic consequences, because these are real. Even in countries where people have not been sick, cost of goods, like basic goods that usually are imported coming from Europe or coming from Asia, are rising up. International commerce is down, and so people are seeing the consequences, socially and economically, not health-wise, and this is very important to cover.
Thanks for that, Caroline. Thank you. Really important points. We're getting close to the end. We've got 7 minutes to go. Before I do a quick wrap, I'm going to ask if our panelists have any final thoughts, or if we've got any final questions from the audience. For Caroline, I've got something from Ali Spring for Caroline. What are some of the peace-based digital literacy resources you use to inform your programming? Or perhaps there is a specific theory or pedagogy you employ. Thank you.
digital literacy resources is not an option in the countries where we work. I'm sorry. You know, internet penetration is 5% in Mali. It's less than 3% in CAR. So you really have to adapt to the people you need to work with and you want to reach. So there are a lot of piece-based tools, boîte à images and really locally based gathering and forum and the face-to-face kind of old-fashioned face-to-face meetings remains some of the best tools. Sorry, I don't know if I answered the questions, but
sure, no, and we've just heard from Ali, and she says, "Forgive me, media literacy would probably have been a better way to phrase it." Do you want to add something on media literacy then, Caroline?
Thanks. In terms of media literacy, this is a new field we are entering. What we've been doing traditionally is to really be transparent about our approach. You know, what does it mean in a country which is divided to be independent, to work for non-partisan information? And we have a charter which is public that we regularly explain on air, explaining the convictions we have and how we work, the issues of transparency and non-partisanship. And it's, you know, educating the audience with those elements that are really at the heart of our work is a first media literacy approach. But we know now we have to do more. And what we are doing with our media partners mainly is really asking the listening groups, you know, what their questions are, and being more interactive directly with the audience in terms of what do they need to know, what do they want to know about, what is a journalist, how do you become a journalist, who is financing us, who is the owner of the media, all these elements that really help better understand the sector and what it is meant for.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you, all of you, Caroline, Alistair, Sarah, and Maha, for your excellent insights. I'm just going to spend a minute or two really just throwing out some of the key words and phrases that really stuck with me during this session, but also as I was kind of preparing for this session. And some of these came up time and time again. I think we're seeing, you know, the critical importance of the audience, the importance of engaging the audience and finding ways to allow our audience to participate. And I think that's particularly important when we're talking about conflict and fragile settings. Trust is clearly an issue we're grappling with globally. And I think the United States, again, I hate to bring it back to my home, but, you know, the United States is perhaps setting a really radical example of how quickly things can go awry. You know, the importance of quality content and transparency around that content, as Caroline was just talking about. How did we get there? Why did we decide to cover this story this way and not another way? Why did we decide to speak to these sources and not these others? Another really interesting dynamic, I think, that came up today, and I think was really highlighted by the work that Sarah and the team at the New Humanitarian is doing, is bridging that global and local, is ensuring that we hear those local voices because they're affected by these global stories as well, and making those local voices relevant on a global level. Relevance is absolutely critical, and I think all of you have alluded alluded to that in some way. You know, I think we need to be very cognizant of the context, very specific contexts and communities in which we do our work. They are also radically different. Working in the Central African Republic would be completely different than doing media development here in the United States. Sorry, I'm flogging a almost dead horse. You know, so I think we need to think about these various communities and this kind of, perhaps we can find some way to bridge these various this culture of communities where we have all these different communities, and finding relevance and bridging the local, the hyperlocal with the global, and even with the regional. Viability and sustainability then is, you know, we throw that on top of everything else, and you know, that just kind of throws a whole other aspect into it. So, you know, all of these things, we need to kind of think of this as an information ecosystem with all these various players, where we've got the audience, where we've got media development, where we've got journalists, where we've got, you know, politicians who have political interests, where we've got, you know, media owners, where, you know, et cetera, civil society, et cetera, et cetera. We need to take all of that into consideration in the work that we do, our specific context, our communities, how to make our work relevant, how to make media content relevant, and how to build trust. So with that, my little clock says it's 10:30. That's my time, sorry. So we're at half past the hour. I want to thank everybody for a fantastic session, some really great insights. It was great to see the work that you all are doing in some really challenging contexts. And I would also like to thank all of the audience members who have participated virtually with some fantastic questions. So thank you all, and thank you.